Okay, so picture this. You're looking at a map of the world. You've got the United States on one side, Europe on the other, and then right in the middle, way up at the top, is this huge white expanse of ice, Greenland. And for decades, it's been there. Quiet, cold, mostly ignored by the headlines, unless we're talking about, climate change.
Mhm.
But recently, this island has become the center of this incredibly tense conversation between the U.S. and Europe. And I think for most of us, the reaction was just, wait, really? Greenland?
It does seem a little improbable on the surface, doesn't it? It almost feels like a glitch in the news cycle. Why would the world's superpowers be stressing over a place with a population of, what, 56,000 people and a whole lot of snow?
Exactly. And the narrative we usually hear is that this is just some kind of diplomatic spat, American brashness bumping up against European politeness. It feels like a bad dinner party conversation that just got completely out of hand. But we've got a stack of research here,
Yeah.
and it suggests we're looking at this all wrong.
We absolutely are. I mean, if you look at the sources we're diving into, the argument is this isn't about diplomatic manners. It's not even really about values in that traditional sense. This is a mechanical failure. It's an incompatibility of operating systems.
Operating systems. Okay, like Windows versus Mac.
That is a perfect analogy, actually. Imagine the US and the EU are these two massive supercomputers, and they're trying to run the same program, let's call it global security. For a long time, they were compatible. They could share files, run the same apps. But recently, they've installed completely different updates. And Greenland isn't the cause of the crash. Greenland is just the error message popping up on the screen.
Okay, I love that. So Greenland is the blue screen of death for the transatlantic alliance.
In a way, yes. The sources use a very specific metaphor here. They call it the alliance membrane.
The alliance membrane, that sounds a little biological. What exactly are we talking about?
It's a powerful image. The idea is that for decades, there was this membrane, this implicit assumption that the U.S. and Europe are operating on the same premise, that they saw the world the same way. The alliance wasn't just a contract on paper, it was a shared reality. What our research suggests is that this membrane hasn't just stretched, it has cracked, and it cracked right over Greenland.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if the membrane is cracking, that sounds bad. But before we get to the crack itself, we need to understand these operating systems. You said they're incompatible. How? What is the European computer trying to do versus the American one?
Right. So let's start with the European operating system. When the EU looks at a competitor, like China, or deals with a security threat, its OS is built on what you'd call institutional management.
Institutional management. That sounds very bureaucratic.
It is, but by design. You have to remember the history. Post-World War II, Europe is built on the idea that if you wrap conflict in rules, in laws, in economic integration, you prevent war. So to the EU, the world is held together by institutions. If China is a problem, you manage it within those institutions. You don't build a wall, you write a regulation.
So if I'm the EU, my first instinct is, let's hold a summit, let's make sure everyone agrees on the legal framework.
Precisely. You see this with the term de-risking that comes out of Brussels. They want to wrap the problem in this membrane of politics, law, and economics. For the EU, a defense line must share political legitimacy. If it's not legally sound and politically agreed upon, it's not valid. It crashes their system.
Okay, so the European OS is process first. Legitimacy is key. Now, what about the U.S. operating system? This feels deeper than just one administration, right?
Oh, it's much deeper. While this got very loud during the Trump years, the sources suggest this is a strategic OS that runs deep in the security establishment. The U.S. OS is based on blocking and exclusion.
Blocking and exclusion. That sounds a lot more.
Yeah, it is. The U.S. OS views a competitor like China not as something to be managed, but as a threat to be blocked. Physically. Immediately.
So let's have a meeting and more lock the door.
Exactly. The priorities in this OS are immediacy, certainty, and non-negotiation. To a U.S. strategic planner, a defense line isn't a political object you debate in Parliament. It's an operational object. It needs to work. It needs to be on. And you can't have it be politicized.
This is a huge difference. One side wants to talk it out to make it legitimate. The other side wants to shut it down to make it safe.
And that's the conflict. It's not about who is morally right. The sources really emphasize this. It's a mechanical question. When a crisis hits, which operating system loads first?
I can see the friction. But why Greenland? Why is that the specific place where these two systems just crashed into each other?
Because Greenland is what you'd call a node. It's a unique point on the map where three massive and incompatible interests overlap perfectly. The research calls it the triple overlap.
Okay, lay it out for me. What are the three layers?
Layer 1 is the U.S. For the United States, Greenland is a primary sensor layer. We're talking about Thule Air Base now, Pacific Space Base. This is where the radar sits that detects ballistic missiles coming over the North Pole.
Right, this is old Cold War tech. Is it really still that crucial?
It's existential. That radar is the eye of the U.S. nuclear umbrella. If it goes down, or if an adversary gets close enough to jam it or spy on it, the entire U.S. defense architecture is compromised. It cannot be rolled back.
Okay, so for the U.S., it's literally life or death. What about the EU?
Layer 2 is the EU and Denmark. For them, Greenland is a symbol of sovereignty and institutional order. It's part of the Kingdom of Denmark, so dealing with it means dealing with Copenhagen, following the rules, respecting autonomy. It's all about the process.
So the U.S. sees a radar station, and the EU sees a constitutional arrangement.
Exactly. And then you have Layer 3, China.
The wild card.
Right. For China, Greenland is a high-latitude node. They call themselves a near-Arctic state. And they are trying to get into the Arctic not with tanks, but with civilian means. Investments in mining, research stations, infrastructure projects.
So you've got China trying to sneak in the back door with money, the EU managing the front door with politics, and the U.S. on the roof with a shotgun saying, nobody moves.
That is a colorful but surprisingly accurate summary, and this is why the membrane cracked here. You can't fudge this. You can't have a political debate about a facility the U.S. sees as existential. The incompatibility is just impossible to hide.
Okay, so that brings us to the cracking membrane.
You're wrong.
Was there a single moment, a trigger event, where everyone realized, oh, we are not on the same page?
There was. It centers around that whole news cycle where the idea of the U.S. buying Greenland was floated.
Oh, right, the Greenland Purchase.
Yeah.
Everyone just laughed at that. It became a global meme.
And that laughter is actually part of the problem. The media and the European public treated it like a joke. But if you look at it through the lens of the U.S. operating system, the blocking OS, it was a signal. The U.S. was signaling that Greenland is a strategic asset subject to operational certainty.
They were saying we need to own the deed to the house so we know the locks work.
Yes. They looked at China trying to build airports in Greenland. They looked at Denmark's slow bureaucratic process, and they just said, this isn't secure. We need total control. Now, look at how the EU and Denmark responded.
They were offended, right? They called it absurd.
They signaled back using their OS. They said, sovereignty and territorial integrity are non-negotiable. They tried to keep the defense line inside that shared political order. To them, you can't buy a country. It just violates the rules.
And the U.S. responds to that.
Confusion, frustration. Because to the U.S., the membrane, that implicit belief that we both prioritize security over protocol, was broken. The U.S. realized, wait, you prioritize political legitimacy. We prioritize operational certainty. We are not running the same software.
That's the crack. The realization that when push comes to shove, the Europeans might choose the process over the result, and the Americans will choose the result over the process.
Precisely. And this leads to the next phase, which is fascinating. What happens when the U.S. OS hits this kind of resistance? It doesn't just crash. It finds a workaround.
It bypasses the blockage.
The sources call it bypassing. Instead of arguing with the EU, the U.S. begins to bypass that institutional layer entirely.
How do you bypass a country? I mean, Denmark's still in charge, isn't it?
Formally, yes, but practically, the U.S. moves toward bilateral fixing, dealing directly with the Danish military, for instance. But even more interestingly, they move to local connection.
Talking to the Greenlanders directly.
Yes. The U.S. opened a consulate in Nuuk. They haven't had a presence there since the 1950s. They started offering direct economic aid packages to Greenland, specifically to counter Chinese offers. They're creating what's called a fait accompli.
A done deal.
Exactly. They are building a structure where the defense line functions without needing to pass through the EU's political consensus. They're hardwiring the security connection, basically, and bypassing the diplomatic switchboard in Brussels.
That is incredibly aggressive when you think about it. It's like your neighbor talking to your kids directly because he doesn't like your parenting style.
It is aggressive. But from the U.S. perspective, it's necessary. If the institution, the EU way, can't guarantee the exclusion of China, then the operation, the U.S. way, has to override the institution.
This really changes how I look at the news. We always hear about the West as this solid bloc. The transatlantic alliance is ironclad. But you're saying there's a mechanical separation happening.
It's not that the alliance is dead,
Yeah.
but the nature of the connection is changing. We are moving from what the sources call premise sharing, where we do things together because we think alike, to conditional connection.
Conditional connection. Sounds transactional. I'll work with you if you deliver X.
That's it. The U.S. is signaling we prioritize access over coordination. If coordination works, great. But if it slows us down, we will go around you.
So where does this all go? Is this a temporary glitch or the new normal?
The sources describe a gradient, a direction of flow. The rule they identify is this. The more defense becomes politicized, wrapped in EU debates and approvals, the more U.S. operations will just bypass politics entirely.
So the more Europe tries to talk about it, the more America just does it.
That's the flow. And it creates a self-reinforcing cycle. The more the U.S. bypasses, the more Europe feels ignored, so it tries to assert its sovereignty, which causes the U.S. to bypass even harder.
What should we be watching for then? What are the signals that this membrane is cracking even more?
The sources point to three things. First, watch the EU. Do they try to apply this institutional management to the whole Arctic defense line?
If they do, the U.S. will not like that.
It would increase friction immediately. Second, watch the U.S. Will they expand this direct connection? More direct deals with local authorities, bypassing national capitals.
Wow, that would be a huge shift in diplomacy.
And third, watch China. Will they try to exploit this gap? Will they try to slip in with a mining deal, betting that the West is too distracted to stop them?
It's like watching two parents argue while the teenager sneaks out the window.
In a very high-stakes geopolitical sense, yes.
You know, this whole thing feels unresolved.
Yeah.
Usually we try to wrap these deep dives up, but this one doesn't seem to have a neat ending.
That's because it is unresolved. The expert view here refuses to give a fixed conclusion. There's no winner yet. We're just observing the failure of the old system.
The most honest takeaway is that we don't know if the membrane can be patched.
So we're just left watching the signals.
We are. It's a question of which is stronger, the desire for shared rules or the demand for immediate security.
This has been honestly kind of mind-bending. It takes a story about ice and turns it into one about the fundamental wiring of the Western world.
It forces us to look past the personalities. It doesn't matter who's president or prime minister. If the operating systems don't talk to each other, the machine doesn't work. Mechanical failure. That's going to stick with me. It's not personal. It's just incompatible code.
Exactly.
Okay, before we sign off, I just want to recap the big takeaway for everyone listening. We started with the confusion over Greenland, why this quiet island became a flashpoint.
Right. And we debunked the idea it was just a diplomatic spat.
Then we moved to this idea of different operating systems. The EU managing threats with institutions, the US blocking them with operations.
And we saw how Greenland was the censor point where you just couldn't hide that incompatibility anymore.
And finally, we talked about the bypass, how the US is starting to wire around the European political layer, leaving us in a world of conditional connection.
It's a sobering thought, but it explains so much of what we see. It's not just noise, it's a system error.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one we need to keep watching. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. But as always, we want to leave you with something to chew on.
Right. We've talked about the past and present, but the future hangs on one critical question. And this is what I want you, the listener, to really ponder. Can institutional order still contain a defense line? Or will operational certainty override it?
That is the question. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you on the next deep dive.